debates in our space through the last several years. There is information on our fellowship and its principles back in the my right in the corner. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that the space and the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory, unceded, of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. A few logistic details. In case of an emergency, there's an exit there, there's an exit there, there's an exit there, and an exit there. There are 4 ways out of this room. Washrooms are out either of the 2 back exits here and in the corridor behind the kitchen. So that's not far away. And all the waste from this food is being served is compostable. So please dispose of it responsibly. And one last reminder, if you have a device that makes sounds, please change it so it doesn't make sounds.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out to tonight's debate. My name is Kayla Holmes. I'm a journalism student at Carleton, and I'm very excited to be one of your moderators tonight.
Once again, thank you for coming out tonight. We have an amazing crowd. My name is Shahad Kaladi. I am on the policy team of the Chief Science Advisor, so I'm very eager to hear what the candidates have to say. To start us off, once again, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered today is traditional, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We are taking this moment to acknowledge this. We are taking this moment to acknowledge this, to recognize the history and the continuation of colonialism on this land, and to remind ourselves that colonial settler society must still undergo change. We encourage you all to take a moment today and each and every single day to consider how it is that you came to be on this land and what your relationship with this land is today. For all the settlers in the room, today and every day, think about the benefits we experience because of colonialism and think about how we can do our best to respect and stand in solidarity with those who are here first. With respect to climate change and environment, we must also acknowledge that Indigenous communities are the most affected by climate change and environmental issues. They have and continue to lead the fight for clean water, clean air, and responsible use of resources. We owe them, and we should support them in their fight against climate change and environmental problems. We should amplify their voices and continue to strengthen our support for them. Tonight, there's over 100 debates on the environment that are taking place across the country. We know that this is a critical first step towards the change that we need, because what doesn't get debated doesn't get done. I'm going to pass it off to Kayla.
Thank you very much. So before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know, if you have any questions that you've not already asked, you can raise your hand now, and our volunteers will be passing around little notes for you to write those down on. And please hand them back to the front desk before 8 p.m. And at 8, we'll also have volunteers going around to pick them up. Vous pouvez poser vos questions en anglais ou en français, et les candidats vont répondre dans la langue de leur choix. Donc, levez vos mains maintenant si vous voulez poser des questions aux candidats. So again, before we get started, you may have seen our interactive wall on this side over there. Please take a moment to add your voice to the wall. We will be sharing it with the candidates afterwards, so make sure your voices are heard. Tonight's debate was organized by Evidence for Democracy, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Ottawa, the New Edinburgh Community Association Environment Committee, the Overbrook Community Association, the Lowertown Community Association, the Lyndon Lee Community Association, the Vanier Community Association, and Action Sandy Hill. Thank you to all those involved and all the volunteers for helping us out tonight. Thank you to all the candidates for being here. And thank you to everyone who is joining us here today. And thank you also to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Ottawa for hosting this event. And I'll pass it back on.
So in order to create an event environment that is inclusive and respectful, we want to set some community ground rules. The first is that there is absolutely no tolerance for hate speech or personal attacks towards the candidates or any other participants in the room. In order for us to have a productive conversation and a healthy democracy, respect for one another is essential. Secondly, while disagreement is inevitable because we all do have different opinions and positions, we are not a monolith. Healthy discourse is encouraged. Our debate is tightly structured for verbal discussion between the candidates and the community. Various forms of protest will not be permitted in order to ensure that everyone has a chance to be heard and that the candidates have a chance to respond. We also want to make sure that we're making sure that we are hearing the candidate's position as thoroughly as possible, as we do have a lot of topics that we need to cover in such a limited time. That being said, though, we do encourage your participation in various forums. As we've mentioned earlier, there are cards for questions because we do want to hear from you. And you can also participate by leaving comments on the wall over there, and we would love to hear your feedback afterwards.
Thank you. So tonight we are joined by Paul Durst of the People's Party of Canada, by the incumbent Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party, by Stephanie Mercier of the NDP, by Oriana Gavirano of the Green Party, and by Michelle Paquette of the Communist Party. Joel Bernard of the Conservative Party was also invited to tonight's debate. So the format for the debate is as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 1 minute to respond to each of the questions. There will be no rebuttals. And then each candidate will also have 2 minutes for closing statements. The order in which candidates have been selected for opening and closing statements is random. And for the questions, we'll be switching around for each of the questions, but we'll let you know. A reminder, once again, I hope you can all hear me, to raise your hand if you need a ticket for any of the questions. Just really want to encourage everyone to do that. So that being said, let's begin tonight's debate. So our first question for tonight will relate to climate change. Around the world. Oh yes, I'm so sorry. Please go ahead with your introductions. So beginning our introductions tonight, can we have Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party?
Bonsoir.
Works better when it's on. Bonsoir, hello, Kwe. I would like also to first acknowledge that we are situated on the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation territory. Et je remercie les organisateurs pour le débat ce soir, Evidence for Democracy et toutes les associations qu'on a nommées tantôt. You know, in Ottawa-Vanier, we are very fortunate to have such green space all around us, from the Rideau Canal to the Ottawa River and through the Ottawa Greenbelt. And I know how important the environment is for you and for many residents in the riding. I hear about it all the time. While door-to-door knocking or meeting with people, it is the conversation that is happening. and the time to act is now. And our Liberal team is taking this commitment at heart. I couldn't be more proud of what we've done in the last 4 years. No government has a better record than us on fighting climate change. We have an ambitious plan which includes over 50 concrete measures that make a difference in all sectors of the economy and will lead the way for a transition to clean energy. Last year, we put a price on pollution, and we put money back in the pockets of Canadians thanks to the Climate Action Incentive. Even with the price on pollution, Canadians kept on creating jobs. Our plan to protect the environment and grow the economy is working, but we need to do more. Remember, other parties don't have a credible plan, and some want to make pollution free again. We have an ambitious plan, and we've already taken many concrete steps to protect our planet and leave a clean world for children and grandchildren. And I look forward to this discussion tonight and thank everyone who came out. And I'm hoping that we can also continue during this campaign to push the environment and climate change subject. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party. Next up, we'll have Paul Durst of the PPC.
Thank you. Et bonsoir tout le monde. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this debate, and hopefully we'll have a wonderful discussion. Thank you for coming. Nobody on this stage denies that climate change, that climate is changing, including me. But I don't share my colleagues' certainty as to why climate is changing or what the preferred solution is, and I certainly don't, along with many Canadians, buy into there being a climate crisis. In that respect, I'm moved by the fact that just this September 23rd, the same day that Greta was talking to the UN, a letter of 500 scientists and professionals was signed to the UN urging restraint. Let me read the opening lines. Climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address the uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately count the real benefits as well as the imagined costs of adaptation to global warming. I know my colleagues are going to say that these scientists are somehow illegitimate or that they call to depoliticize this discussion is somehow misguided because they reject the consensus view. But the fact is, science is all about disagreement. Consensus is a political term, not a scientific one, and it becomes a barrier to true scientific discussion. I will add to this the public statement made by the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, Petteri Talas, that he said this publicly, that he does not accept the arguments that the end of the world is at hand. My rural upbringing and love of nature brings me in line with the environmental thinking of the philosopher and farmer Roger Scruton. His prescription is to start local with the landscape that you love. Here in Ottawa, there is much to love. Our 2 rivers and 1 canal being examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Durst of the People's Party of Canada. Just a reminder to all of the candidates to keep an eye on our timekeepers right in the front row. So next up we have Oriana Gabriano of the Green Party.
Tout d'abord, merci à la terre qui nous accueille. Thanks for the earth that's welcoming us today. My name is Oriana Gabriano. I'm 36 years old. I am the mom of a 16-year-old adolescent. I live close to what I call the Ottawa-Vanier pub, and also à côté d'une rue nommée, sur la rue nommée au nom du défunt Geoffre Bélanger. I am here today because I believe that we have the solutions for most of the problems we face. And we have been facing those problems for a while. I decided to run because I didn't see the political will in addressing those issues. because I believe that no one here has the exact solution to tackle climate change, I believe that there is a need for collaboration, cross-party collaboration, to be able to find the solutions for this crisis. That's why I decided to run for the Green Party, because like me, I found people that believe that we need to be working together to find solutions. A green government will establish a cross-party inner cabinet to deal with climate change and limit the destructive impact of partisan politics. Now, thank you all for being here today. I am glad to count on uninformed voters like you today. That being said, those who are not here today or don't see the emergency are in majority people who have been struggling to make ends meet. C'est pourquoi je fais de l'élimination de la pauvreté et la protection de l'environnement mes priorités pour cette campagne à Ottawa-Vanier. That's why I make eliminating poverty and protecting the environment my two priorities for Ottawa-Vanier.
Thank you, Oriana Gabriano of the Green Party. Next up, can we have introductions from Stephanie Mercier of the NDP?
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. Merci à tous et à toutes d'être venus ici aujourd'hui. Last summer, I spent 67 days walking from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trails. And let me tell you, it occurred to me how much we waste on a day-to-day basis and how much energy we use. And I got so frustrated to realize how much the environment takes care of us and how so careless we are with it. And last Friday, I walked with 20,000 people at the climate strike. And I think we showed people that when we are united, we are unstoppable. And I think my colleague Leah Gazan from Winnipeg Center said it best when she said, I think we're at a point where we're living in a growing corporate dictatorship where the value of human life and human beings and the value of the environment means less than the wealth and prestige and power of multinational corporations. It's time to fight climate change like we actually want to win. And we have to transition to a clean energy, carbon-free economy while investing in workers and creating jobs. And we have to make life more affordable for families with things like retrofits, electric transit, and zero-emission vehicles. New Democrats, we're in it for you. We're not in it for big corporations. We're not in it for the lobbyists. We know that Canadians want action on climate change, and that's why we have a bold climate plan that will also transition while creating 300,000 jobs all over Canada. I'm ready to work for this community, and I think with different choice, we can have better results. And I think we need to keep pushing for better for your families because we do not inherit this planet from our grandparents. We borrow it from our children, and they deserve a planet that's going to be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie Mercier of the NDP. Finally, can we have Michel Paquette of the Communist Party?
Bonsoir. Thank you for the invitation. The world is at a tipping point of irreversible climate change, requiring emergency measures by all governments. Average temperatures are rising 2.5 times faster in Canada than the global average. While the full story is complex, the basic fact is that our profit-driven capitalist system is destroying our environment and our future by pumping huge volumes of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. Liberals and Tories are fighting over a carbon tax that won't even come close to stopping climate change because their hands are tied to big business and corporate interests. Imposing carbon taxes in the form of increased fuel prices transfers costs onto working people, not on the profit-driven corporations responsible for over 70% of GHG emissions. The Communist Party's goal is to cut emissions in half by 2030 and eliminate them completely by 2050. To achieve this goal, we must do at least 3 things. 1, cut military spending by 75%, not just for peace, but to stop the military's huge carbon footprint related to its use of aircrafts, the naval fleet, and other military operations. 2, end corporate-driven energy extraction and export policies, which aim to boost profits at the expense of the environment, indigenous rights, and our collective health and safety. 3, establish public ownership and democratic control of renewable energy sources under transparent and responsible planning. This is fundamental to drastically reducing carbon emissions. Only a government that puts people and nature before profits can save us from this urgent crisis. Merci. Bon débat.
thank you, Michelle Beckett of the Communist Party, and thank you to all of our candidates for their introductions.
I just wanted to encourage everyone to be mindful of accessibility. If there's any seats that are free next to you, please put your hand up. If not, please make sure that we're prioritizing the people who need the seats the most during this debate. Thank you so much.
Anybody want to join us?
I'll let the room settle a little bit. So I think for ease of technical, technical issues with the microphones here, we're going to start our first question down at the end with Paul Durst and move it along towards us. And then for each question, we'll move down so that the next candidate, in this case, Bonaforte, can start and pass it down along if that works for everyone. So just a reminder, all candidates have 1 minute to answer these questions. And I'm going to start us off. Around the world, we are seeing inspiring examples of leadership to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and accelerate the shift to a green economy. At the same time, we are seeing a ramp up of the effects of climate change. We are seeing the effects of extreme weather events here in Ottawa, with significant flooding becoming the norm. These events are causing anxiety and worry, given their enormous financial and environmental impact. Per person, Canadians have the highest GHG emission of all G20 industrialized nations. What are the key elements of an action plan that you will advocate for to ensure Canada meets its international obligations to reduce GHG pollution? Paul Durst of the PPC.
Thank you. Unfortunately, and I think this is going to be repeated throughout this debate, I'm going to have to disagree with a lot of how this question was framed. But the People's Party isn't about controlling the economy. We will let the economy run, and it's about setting the conditions for the economy and for innovation. So we want things to go forward with green solutions that actually work. I'm not a climate scientist, but again, I can quote from that letter that I mentioned earlier, the 500 climate scientists and professionals indicating that there needs to be some restraint on the arguments. Let me read what they wrote about extreme weather, for instance. There is no statistical evidence that global warming is intensifying hurricanes, floods, droughts, and such natural disasters or making them more frequent. So what will we do? We're going to withdraw from the Paris Accord. We'll abolish the Liberals government's carbon tax and leave it to provincial governments to adopt programs to reduce emissions. And we'll abolish.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Bonaforte of the Liberal Party.
Merci. It's kind of hard to answer in 1 minute what we can do, but let me start at least the conversation by saying that we are committing to a net zero emissions by 2050. There's a lot of work to do up until then, and we need to have different actions to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and we will be setting legal binding 5-year milestones based on the advice of experts and consultations with Canadians. Also, we're to ensure energy workers and communities can shape their own future by introducing a Just Transition Act, giving workers access to training, support, new opportunities needed to succeed in the clean economy. Also, another to reduce carbon emissions, we will support school and transit systems in their transition towards clean energy. And one last that I'd like to offer in this great platform that we're proposing is the retrofit for 1.5 million homes. This is just a start. Thank you.
So thank you, Bonaforte of the Liberal Party. We'll now hear from Stephanie Mercier of the NDP.
Thank you. And Mona finished that by saying this is just a start and they've had 4 years, so says a lot. Our climate plan is the only one strong enough to meet Canada's obligation while also keeping our families at the heart of our work. We're facing more and more climate-related disasters, especially we've seen this in Ottawa-Vanier with the 2 floods in the last year. So we're going to set science-based targets in line with keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we'll keep ourselves accountable with regular audits. We're also going to create 300,000 good jobs over Canada within a first mandate and rebuild local economies while lowering our emissions. And we'll end the big bricks to polluters the Liberals brought in, save families $1,000 every year with energy efficiency retrofits, work to electrify transit by 2030, and we'll be net zero emission by 2030, which is 20 years earlier than the Liberals platform is promising. And we'll make sure that Indigenous people are always full and equal partners in our efforts to confront the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie Mercier of the NDP. Now we'll hear from Mariana Gabriano of the Green Party.
I'm standing up for the people in the back, by the way.
Thank you.
So I won't repeat the targets that have already been set by the NDP Stephanie, because we have the same targets. The first thing is overcoming politics as we do usually, as I mentioned in my, sorry, I'll repeat that. Overcoming politics as usual, because that's what I mentioned as first thing in my introduction. The second one is provide a livable income, because when you're struggling to put food on the table, you don't care about paper or plastic. Let the people of Alberta know that we care about them by recognizing that the government has placed them in a survival mode, making them at the same time victims and stakeholders. The people of Alberta are not attached to gas or oil. They are attached to income and food on the table and roof on their heads. The government has failed to provide that to them, and we are going to provide that to them by ending the pipeline project. While ending the pipeline.
Thank you. Mariana Gabriano of the Green Party. And I hear from Michelle Paquette of the Commons Party.
So first of all, the majority of greenhouse gas emissions are not created by Canadian consumers, but by a few major corporations. This is why we must, one, take our energy resources out of corporate hands and put them under democratic public control and ownership. Two, we need to end fossil fuel energy extraction, so no more pipelines, no more fracking, no more tar sands, and move towards renewable sources, which would be again nationalized. Three, let's cut military spending by 75%, not only to de-escalate Canada's involvement in wars of aggression around the world, but also to reduce its enormous carbon footprint. And four, let's impose strong penalties for corporations which break the law, including jail time for corporate executives. For the rest of our action plan, please visit votecommunist.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle Paquette of the Communist Party. So this conversation is both on climate change, but also the environment. So we will be discussing various aspects of the environment tonight. The first is water, which is definitely something we are very rich in. Canada is home to roughly half of the world's lakes and an equivalent volume of the world's fresh water, and roughly 1/4 of the world's wetlands. The Insurance Bureau of Canada has noted that climate change, as well as the historic loss of wetlands across Canada due to the industrial development, has led to a massive 250% increase in flooding over the past 2 decades, as well as a reduction in water quality and wildlife habitat. What can federal governments do to work with different sectors like municipalities and farmers to reduce both water pollution and the risk of flood events, which have affected so many Ottawa residents over the past few years? So once again, we're going to start with our PPC candidate. Oh, we're starting from the front?
Mona starts, Paul ends this time.
I think I'm the second. Yeah, first to start.
Oh, okay. My apologies. We're going to start with the incumbent, Mona Forte from the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you. You're doing a great job, by the way. Thank you.
We know that climate change affects communities across Canada and especially in Ottawa. As our cities grow, infrastructure that surrounds our community needs to respond to those new realities and changes. That is why, as a Liberal Party, we are committed. I'm going to present 3 measures. Conserving 25% of Canada's oceans and lands by 2025, working towards 30% by 2030. And this means putting more investment in marine science and fighting invasive species. Another measure that I wanted to share with you is that we will commit to new measures to support people coping with disaster, including the EI Disaster Assistance Benefit, new national flood pool and completion of the flood maps. This is something that has been raised by scientists and municipalities, so we will invest in making sure that this is done. And the last one before no zero. Okay, sorry, I will have more to say soon.
Canada is one of the countries with the most freshwater resources on the planet, but we have to be responsible with it. We have some of the most polluted lakes and water, like Lake Erie, for example. So we need to take action on pollution. And what we want to do is we want to recognize Canadians' right to a healthy environment by putting it into law. And we're going to create a federal environmental bill of rights to make sure that everybody can enjoy clean water, air, and land. We're also going to create a national freshwater strategy and work with the provinces and territories to protect waterways and restore navigable water protections. And we're going to tackle increasingly common floods by making sure that the communities all over Canada are equipped and have the resources they need to work against the floods and to manage disasters.
So that was Stephanie from the NDP. Up next, we have Oriana
Gabirano. Once again, I'm going to talk about collaboration because it's a key issue. The way the jurisdiction is currently divided has created a patchwork system that doesn't protect our water. We want to put together a council of governments, bringing together Indigenous governments and also all levels of the governments together to develop a national water strategy to ensure that from the federal government to local governments, everyone is making sure that we have access to safe water, that we can drink water, but also we can swim in water. We've seen a lot of beaches being closed for contamination. We've also heard or seen the fish in Gatineau that were dead. This is very alarming. We want to invest in innovation that will water waste, including rainwater, and we want to increase support towards organic and sustainable farming options to reduce contamination.
Great.
So up next, we have Michelle Paquette from the Communist Party.
It's demonstrated that most existing infrastructure in the city of Ottawa was not designed to withstand future climate conditions. The Communist Party will help municipalities and farmers to deal with water pollution and flood events by, first, help rebuild Canada's public infrastructure to deal with climate change by cutting military spending and imposing a progressive tax on large corporations. Second, restore local democracy and autonomy and adequately fund municipal governments and services. And three, protect Canada's food sovereignty and reduce energy costs by promoting sustainable, organic, domestic agriculture and farmland preservation. We must curb the power of agro-industrial monopolies and shift to environmentally sustainable methods of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Up next, we have Paul Durst from the People's Party of Canada.
Thank you. Once again, there's a degree of alarmism in the way the question is framed, and I'll have to reject that part. But there's plenty we can do, working collaboratively through all jurisdictions. We can focus attention on water by making the scope local instead of global. I think that's a winning strategy both psychologically and practically. Psychologically, a lot of people are feeling worn out from the constant alarmism. The People's Party of Canada believes in innovation and addresses the actual needs of the community, not innovation that may address some future need. If areas flood, we need solutions specific to those areas. For example, in 2011, the engineering firm Stantec designed an innovative flood control system in Sandy Hill, which stores 4.4 million gallons of water, while on the surface is a beautiful grassy parkland to prevent excess stormwater flooding basins. It's a beautiful parkland, it's beautiful, environmentally sound, a way of protecting the area, and we need to look at things more locally. Thank you.
I just want to thank our different members here for being so eager to contribute. I'm just going to pass it along to Kayla.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So our next question will relate to wilderness conservation. And we'll start this question with Stéphanie Mercier of the NDP. So Canada is falling below our international commitments to protect wildlife, and our parks and other protected areas are not funded at the level needed to conserve the diverse plants and animals that live there. A recent study shows that 50% of Canadian wildlife species are in decline. 82% of Canadians say that they're concerned that future generations will have close or easy access to nature. What will you do to protect the quality and quantity of wilderness in Canada and the natural spaces in and around Ottawa?
So the natural beauty, biodiversity, and wilderness that we live in is a big part of who we think of ourselves as Canadians. And we need to make sure that future generations get to enjoy our natural heritage. But over 1 million species around the world are facing extinction, and experts are calling for tripling the amount of protected land and water in Canada by 2030 to prevent ecological disasters and to ensure that our kids get to experience our natural heritage as much as we have. And so right now, just over 10% of Canada is being actively conserved. And so we have an incredible opportunity that the Liberals haven't taken yet. And so as New Democrats, we're going to protect 30% of our land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030 and back those protections with funding and enforcement. And we'll protect biodiversity by using all federal tools under the Species at Risk Act and ensuring the implementation of recovery strategies. And we believe that every Canadian has a right to a healthy environment and clean air and water. And that's why we'll bring an environmental bill of rights to make that enshrined in law. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we'll have Oriana Gambirano of the Green Party.
So where there's a bridge for human, there should be a bridge for animals too. We've built roads and separated communities. What if the only way you had to go to the grocery store and come back home was to cross the highway by foot? No calming measures involved. So building bridges for wildlife is one actionable items that we can do. We want to increase funding, federal funding, to the Department for Endangered Species, and for their protection. Invest $100 million a year for 4 years for indigenous-led and protected and conserved areas. We also want to increase the funding for Parks Canada to protect ecological integrity. So we have to be aware, as the Green Party, we are aware that every time we endangered one aspect of our life, we endangered the whole life cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Michelle Paquette of the Communist Party.
So first, we need to ban industrial development in parks and halt urban sprawl in and around Ottawa. Ottawa's green belt is needed to cool down the urban heat it generates. Second, we must enact legislation to protect biodiversity and impose strong penalties for corporations, including jail time for corporate executives. Third, we can adequately fund emergency wildlife protection by cutting Canada's war budget and taxing corporations. But most importantly, Indigenous peoples are the rightful owners of this land and have been leading the fight for the protection of the environment. We must implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, including their right to veto harmful projects. This means guaranteeing Indigenous rights to full, free, prior, and informed consent over all development, resource extractions, and pipelines on or affecting their land and livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Paul Durst of the PPC. We have another microphone down on this end. I know it's hard to pass it along, but if you can switch to that one, yeah.
Okay, our focus, again, in this case, is on local manageable problems. In the Ottawa region, that means protecting our beautiful natural heritage in the form of parks and river systems. And across Canada, similar groups could do so for their specific areas as well, local. So here's what this means in practice. There are groups working on practical local solutions. Here are some examples. The Ottawa Naturals, the Field Naturals Club, Ottawa Riverkeeper, and Safe Wings Ottawa. Where my dad lives, he's highly involved in Southern Ontario and Ducks Unlimited. And so one of the PPC policies is to reduce your income tax, lower it for everybody. This gives you more flexibility to work locally in associations such as these to be able to invest in and put your money into areas that you want to see worked on. And people can do that right across Canada because income tax will be lowered for all Canadians. But when I'm elected, I will make sure that groups like this have their voice within the National Capital Commission.
Thank you. Finally, we'll hear from Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party.
So hopefully in 1 minute, I can tell you it's 3 measures that we're going to do. We're going to commit a $3 billion commitment to better conserve and restore forests, grasslands, agricultural lands, wetlands, and coastal areas. And I was talking to you about the target for 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. The other one is, you probably heard about it, we will also plant 2 billion trees over 10 years, which will increase the amount of carbon stored in nature. And locally, I want to at least talk about Ottawa a little bit by saying that our government has invested in parks, pathways, historic institutions like the Ottawa New Edinburgh Club, and throughout the National Capital Region by investing over $55 million over 2 years to make sure that we restore these parks and these the trails. So we will continue investing on that.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you. So our next topic is pollution and toxic substances. Air pollution is still the leading environmental cause of death and illness in Canada. Changes to the environment are now affecting our health, and Canada remains the only Western industrialized nation without legally binding national air pollution standards. In addition, our laws and regulations have not kept pace with emerging threats from newer toxic substances in our environment, including from everyday consumer products. Our overarching toxic law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, has not been significantly strengthened in 20 years. What will you do to ensure that Canadians are better protected from health and environmental impacts of toxic substances? So we're going to start with Arena.
We believe that everyone has the right to a healthy environment. We must use precautions when making decisions about the substances, the projects we approve when there's no scientific evidence of safety. We want, and that within the Environmental Protection Act, we want to limit the approval of the use of toxic chemicals that affect our health and environment. We want to regulate microfibers as a toxic substance. We want to legislate public participation rights and wider the access to judicial review in court. And once again, investing in organic and local and sustainable farming is one solution. The other one, air pollution, is also driven by transportation. So we want to invest in local public transportation and railways across the country.
Thank you, Ariana. If we can keep one mic at the other end of the table, please, just to make the transition easier. Thank you. So up next, we have Michelle Paquette. Thank you.
The Communist Party calls to stop harmful development projects such as the Muskrat Falls Dam in Labrador. Indigenous land protectors have been relentlessly fighting this hydroelectric dam because it will poison their land by releasing mercury into the environment, poisoning fish, wildlife, and putting their health in jeopardy. This has happened before in grassy narrows where over 90% of the population now lives with mercury poisoning. The federal government has consistently failed to deliver help. Communists would enact toxic legislation to avoid future tragedies like this. We know that hydroelectricity is the #1 source of energy in Canada and does not need fossil fuels to operate. But hydroelectric dams still have serious environmental consequences. In producing the necessary reservoir, dams also flood large swaths of farmland and produce methane and carbon dioxide as the flooded vegetation decomposes.
Thank you, Michelle Paquette. Paul, the mic is yours.
The People's Party believes in making air water and soil cleaner. This is particularly true for the clean drinking water of remote First Nations communities, which needs to be fixed very soon. What we're looking for are practical solutions that make a difference in the promotion of innovation instead of regulation. I like a bottom-up approach where in a free market, Canadians can refuse to support industries or companies that are not innovating quickly by not buying their products or services. Consider an innovation like the electric car. We're not going to see wide-scale adoption through awareness messaging or through government interference. We'll see that happen if electric cars are good cars, which is what's finally happened. That's why reducing taxes and red tape does contribute to the environment. It allows innovative thinkers to try solutions that we can champion.
Thank you, Paul. Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party.
Merci. We will continue our efforts by banning single-use plastics by 2021 and also continue to protect people from harmful chemicals. We will also be strengthening Canada's Environmental Protection Act, and I will be able to talk to you more about this later. One thing I want to really stress on is the fact that Indigenous communities should have reliable access to safe, clean drinking water. In the last 4 years, we've invested over $2 billion to build, repair, and upgrade public water systems in First Nations communities and working with our First Nation partners, and have eliminated 87 long-term drinking water advisories. There's still 56 remaining, and we have to continue to move forward by investing to eliminate the rest of these drinking water advisories that have not been fulfilled. So we will commit to continue that track, and I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mona Fortier. Stephanie.
Thank you. It's critically important to protect Canadians from harmful chemical substance. And like Mona said she's going to enforce the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. But the thing is, the law hasn't been significantly updated since 1999, despite being reviewed every 5 years. So we're going to act better to protect Canadians from toxic substance in everyday products by strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and other legislations. And we're also going to reduce exposure to substance common in plastic by banning the single-use in plastic. And that's it for me. Thank you.
So we do have a few additional questions for you before we turn it over to the audience. The first being, science done within government is essential for monitoring our environment and protecting the health of Canadians and informing our policies. Without proper funding, this research is at risk, and without basic monitoring, Canada will not be able to assess the effectiveness of mitigation efforts on the climate crisis, and in turn will not be able to meaningfully address the crisis. Yet funding the federal government science is lower today than it was in 2011. What is our plan to support federal government science and to ensure that we have data and research necessary to make informed policy decisions? So we'll start with Michelle.
When climate change science and environmental regulations hindered the Harper regime's plan to push the growth of oil sands, the Conservatives didn't hesitate to muzzle government scientists. Underfunding of federal research and the long-lasting effects of Harper-era gags on scientists are a powerful reminder that we cannot trust a government whose aims are tied to corporate interests. Neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives can ensure their policies are informed by unbiased scientific research when they are ultimately appeasing big business interests. The Communist Party of Canada guarantees funding to climate change research necessary to make informed policy decisions, free from corporate interests. We can easily fund this important research by taxing large corporations and cutting the war budget, because the military is one of the world's biggest polluters. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Paul Durst of the People's Party of Canada.
Hello. Okay. I have no intention to support federal government science, but every intention to support government decision makers. And there's a slight nuance there that we have to understand because it's the decision makers that need the right data. They need to have the right science, that objective research behind them to make that decision. So let's look at ways that we can get that answers, the right answers to them. And this takes innovation. And innovation happens when governments and others get out of the way. And that's why tenure exists at universities, so that the professors can think freely and come up with their ideas on any given topic. And the source of the data may vary from topic to topic. We should make it a goal to fund the most objective research in order to get the best data to decision makers. So the People's Party will look to private enterprise and innovation for data and answers.
Mona Forte.
Merci. Our Liberal government committed from 2015 to bring back science and evidence-based research and data in all policy development. And the largest investment in Canadian history, with a budget of almost $4 billion in the 2018 budget for our scientists, innovators, and even our PhD students. You should see how much Carleton, University of Ottawa, and just in the region, how the research has started, and we're really happy to see that it's moving along. And we will work with environmentalists, the experts, throughout our fight against climate change. And we will also keep Canada's oceans healthy. We will move forward with more investments in marine science and fighting invasive species.
Thank you.
So to make Canada a global leader in emerging sectors and meet the challenges we now face, we're going to harness the power of Canadian research and development to establish target centers of excellence that will build on innovation to support the transition to a low-carbon economy. And we're also going to create a center of excellence for research and development in zero-emission vehicles. And we're going to support Canadian manufacturing of batteries, energy storage solutions, and alternative fuels like biofuels made from waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ariana?
I believe that we need to fund research and innovation from public and private sector. One does not take away from the other. Health effects, current health effects from the crisis that we're facing are unknown right now. We don't know exactly what people have. We're discovering new diseases. So we need to fund that. And we also need to fund our health system. I think that's very important to mention. We have people that work on shift and that are not able to assess completely what's going on, and because we're not giving them enough time to do so. So I think it's a combination of research and innovation, with also thinking about the health system that we have in place right now.
Thank you. Evidence helps decision makers effectively weigh complex options and make fully informed decisions that benefit all Canadians. It is only through using sound evidence that governments can make the best decisions for our country and its people. If you are elected, how will you ensure government decisions are based on the best available evidence? And we'll start down at the other end with Paul Durst.
Thank you. This is actually a problem I'm very familiar with from 20-year career as an officer in the military, and including in some pretty tough areas. These decisions when lives are at stake, and it's a leadership problem. Oftentimes, you're confronted with incomplete and contradictory evidence. That's the case with climate. Part of good leadership is transparency. Evidence used in decision-making on the environment will be published and open for review. Also, to make the decision-making process easier, the PPC will not pander to special interest groups such as the oil and gas lobby. This will make it infinitely easier to make objective decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our Liberal government believes in science, research, and evidence-based decision-making. It's the base of this we take. And I wanted to mention that we unmuzzled scientists in 2015. We reinstated the position of the Chief Scientific Advisor by appointed Dr. Mona Nimmer. And with Bill C-69, you all know Bill C-69, our overhauled the environmental protection assessment system in Canada. As you'll remember, under Stephen Harper, these rules were weakened to benefit his wealthy friends, and we have strengthened these agencies' powers. We need to put in place better rules to protect our environment, fish and waterways, respect Indigenous rights, and rebuild public trust in how decisions about resource development are made. One key element I wanted to share also is that the Canadian Energy Regulator has an essential role to play in ensuring access to safe, affordable, and reliable energy. Merci.
We'll hear from Sylvain. Merci. Thank you. I'm a nurse and I've done some research, and so I believe in science and science-based evidence. But I'm also a law school student and I believe in facts. And I think when we don't listen to experts, we find ourselves in a crisis. And I think that's exactly what's happening right now with the climate crisis. And so we need to establish a framework for evidence to encourage the integration of science into practice. And we need to integrate and synthesize evidence and bring it to policymakers. And we need to ensure that that evidence is accessible to policymakers by using common outcome measures understood by not only scientists, policymakers, politicians, and industries, but also the public. And we need to remain transparent during that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariana Gabriano.
I'll make this very short. Voting for a Green Party is essentially voting for evidence-based party and policies. Also, we also know that things change very quickly and we need to adapt as we go along. We are not scared of change. The only change we're scared of is the climate change.
And we'll hear from Michelle Paquet.
There is currently a fundamental problem where important policy decisions are being based on profit instead of established science. This is caused by the undeniable cozy relationship between corporations and government, which impacts directly research funding, the production of scientific evidence, and policymaking. The Communist Party of Canada will ensure decisions are based on the best available evidence by adequately funding environmental research that is free from corporate profit interests. The best evidence can only be produced in the context of a government which puts people and nature before profit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So our last question before we turn it over to the audience is, the world's leading climate scientists have warned us that we must virtually eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 if we are to avoid a climate-driven catastrophe. This means that oil and gas industry must be almost eliminated, and the jobs that are bound to it, directly or indirectly, have to suffer the same fate. The transition to a green economy will more than compensate for job losses in the long run. But during the transition in the short term, workers losing their jobs in oil and gas related industries do need to make a living. How do you see Canada transitioning our economy away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy, yet not leaving hydrocarbon dependent workers behind? Mona Fortier.
Two measures I wanted to share with you on this question is the fact that we will help producers get the technology and infrastructure they need to expand and create more good jobs with the new technology and commercial support fund that will be administered through Western economic diversification. And this fund will help connect farmers, researchers, agribusiness, and energy companies and help give producers an advantage in the clean economy. We will also cut corporate taxes in half for businesses that develop technologies or manufacture products that have zero emissions. This is a new initiative that we have discussed with many of the businesses to see if they were ready for that kind of challenge. And this is one that we shared. I mentioned, because I have time, two other important initiatives is we will plant 2 billion trees that will help create about 3,500 seasonal jobs in tree planting each year. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, merci.
Thank you. Canadians can thrive in a low carbon future if we make the right choices today. And right now, the Liberals are spending $3.3 billion on fossil fuel subsidies. They spent $1.6 billion on oil patch handouts, and they spent $4.5 billion on a pipeline. And so we know that we can transition to a cleaner future if we put that money into our transition. And so our plan will invest in preparing Canadians for the jobs of the future and in making sure that every community can prosper when no one is left behind. It's time for bold steps like making our energy carbon free, retrofitting homes across the countries, and putting more zero emissions vehicle on the road. And people say, you know what, people say opposing pipelines kills jobs in Alberta. I say this is about getting out in front of the changes that are coming, and it's ensuring that no worker is left behind.
Thank you. Yes, I'll just move on this. So opposing to pipelines is killing people in Alberta. Actually, having that pipeline is killing people everywhere. And again, like I said before, it's because we didn't give an opportunity for those people to have a guaranteed income. And what we want to put in place is the guaranteed livable income. So to ensure that people are not struggling to meet ends while we're ending the pipeline project and putting in place that fair and just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Michel Paquet.
The Communist Party of Canada will end corporate-driven energy extraction and export policies, which aim to boost profits at the expense of Indigenous rights and the health and safety of people. We will cancel all pipeline projects that enable the maintenance and expansion of tar sands and halt fracking operations. Communists will not leave behind hydrocarbon-dependent workers behind. With our plan for a green job initiative, we can guarantee jobs at equivalent wages for energy workers in the renewable energy sector and in other sectors of the economy. This initiative is an important facet of our comprehensive full employment strategy based on massive public investments to increase value-added jobs in environmentally sustainable manufacturing and secondary industries.
Thank you. Paul Durst.
Thank you. Canada is an oil exporting country. You know, this is what we have based a lot of our economy on, and that needs to continue. We all know, though, that it will come to an end. Fossil fuels have limited, right? So we need to start looking at, and I'm in favor of all kinds of green technologies that might start coming, but we need to transition in a responsible way that doesn't harm our Canadian citizens. So we do it by thinking this through. We do it by, maintaining what we need to continue the prosperity that Canada has. We can't do anything without our prosperity in place. So we need to think very carefully about this transition and how that will happen. We export things. We depend on a global market. And if that global market isn't there for other things other than the oil that we export and the liquid natural gas and coal, those things, we need to have something to replace it for the benefit of Canadians, or we don't pay off that $700 billion debt.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our debate participants for answering our questions, and now we will be taking questions from the audience.
All right, we have our first audience question. Just a reminder, questions had to be submitted earlier. We will not be taking questions directly from the crowd. So our first question, the agricultural sector has been identified as a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but has also been identified as an area that could play a central role in climate change mitigation through techniques such as regenerative agriculture. What would you do to transform Canada's agricultural sector to become an asset rather than an obstacle to climate change mitigation efforts? So if I'm not mistaken, we'll start with Stéphane Mercier. Yes. So still 1 minute for answers to these questions.
Yep. So I think our agriculture industry is very important, and we need to work with farmers and help them in the transition as well. Like I said, if we work on clean tech and more energy renewable resources, we can transition to a cleaner environment and just tackle climate crisis. So we want a transition that leaves no one behind, and that means farmers. We want to create local food hubs. We want to make sure that we go more locally with good food from the farmers. So we need to include everyone.
We'll now hear from Oriana Gabriano.
I think it's something that I already addressed, but we want to invest in sustainable agriculture, including hydroponics and regenerative agriculture. So I don't want to waste anyone's time by repeating myself again. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Michelle Paquette.
Well, I'm going to repeat myself. So again, the Communist Party of Canada, we want to curb the power of agro-industrial monopolies and shift to environmentally sustainable methods of agriculture. We think it's important to protect Canada's food sovereignty and reduce energy costs by promoting sustainable, organic, domestic agriculture and farmland preservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear from Paul Burst.
Yeah, so I don't think one is exclusive from the other. You can have a zero net farm. And I've seen this, it's happening in Oklahoma with some incentives coming from the government. Farmers are now, you've heard of the old practice of letting the land lay fallow. Well, there's certain crops or certain mixtures of plants that can be put on that fallow ground, and it actually are huge carbon absorbers. So you've got this land that's fallow anyways, it becomes an absorber. You've got perhaps your beef or whatever is going on in the rest of the farm or whatever, and it neutralizes each other. It becomes a zero net gas producer. It's absorbing as much as it's producing. These kinds of things, these innovations, are what can make us continue on some of our traditional agricultural sector. So there's not need for one or the other. There needs to be some discussion about this.
Thank you. You're from Monapotier.
Merci. We all have a role to play, and I believe that in the past, I know that 4 years, I've seen farmers suggest how they can do better with their lands and innovate, and I believe governments can support these farmers and these environmentalists and also experts with incentives, either through research, either through incentives, like I mentioned, to help them cut by half their to be able to have clean tech technology. And also with the Just Transition Act, that is a specific measure that will help people to giving workers and farmers access to the training, support, and new opportunities to find those ways of reducing gas emissions. We have a way of making sure that we move forward. And I believe that if we all really listen to how their situation is in their different realities, we'll be better working together to find them and support them with different financial incentives. Thank you.
So our next question is actually a two-in-one question. So from federal to municipal governments, there are a number of public vehicles owned by governments, whether it's aircrafts, buses, or trains. Related, the transportation industry has a significant impact on our climate. How will your party commit to transitioning to more sustainable transportation options, for example, electric fleets? And what are your party's plans to support cleaner options for transportation?
I've touched that also. So cleaner transportation also means a public transportation. We need to invest in public transportation to give options to the people. Also, one thing that is very important, we need to stop putting measures that limit people in before we give an option. So by putting the carbon price before we gave an incentive for people to buy electric cars, and by placing a charging station, by not placing charging stations on the street, we're not giving people the option to empower themselves and be the driving of the change. So I think we need to invest more in those solutions and provide healthy transportation ways for everyone.
Thank you, Ariana Gabriel. Up next, we have Michelle Paquette.
So we also want to build a free mass public transit system that would not be relying on fossil fuels.
Short and sweet, thank you. Paul Durst.
Again, we want to support innovation and not regulation. Let those good products, let those good ideas come out, and let them, the public can go and be attracted to whatever they want to do and support those ideas. And we're also, one of the things behind our platform is respect, and that is respect for jurisdictions. So the municipalities have their jurisdictions in which they have to operate and do things. Great thing in Ottawa, I have an LRT. I think it's wonderful. My daughter said that she's saving time in transit, and I think she's going to be using it more often now. So those are good. Municipalities need to continue to push along those lines. Same thing with provinces. But as a federal institution, we will respect others' jurisdictions.
Mona Fortier.
Let's see. So I hope everybody has had a chance to go on the LRT since its opening. And as you know, the government committed to go with phase 2. I'm hoping we can work on phase 3 to be able to go to the out more west and also more east. So this is one of the commitments that we are working on. And also with the zero emission vehicles, that is something that we need to not be only in the adoptive learning part, but really push on helping. And it's something that we will make easier and more affordable for people to have access to zero emission vehicles. And also start giving some incentives to people to buy used zero emissions vehicles. And one of the example is to provide a 10% rebate on used zero emission vehicles. So we're really trying to push Canadians to start using these rebates or incentives to buy, to go towards zero emission vehicles.
Stephanie Mercier.
Thank you. The NDP wants to electrify transit by 2030. I think what we want as well is to build zero emission vehicles here in Canada and give incentives to families up to $15,000 per family to buy zero emission vehicles made in Canada. That way we also encourage our auto industry. And I think the government needs to be a leader. And so our fleet will be changed to electric by 2025. And we also want to promote the easiest thing, promote the active ways to get around, like cycling and walking. And I think that's all easy things that we can do to promote the way we get around and make it more cleaner and greener for our environment.
Thank you. So our next question is in regards to reports about plastic being shipped overseas. So what will you do to ensure Canadian efforts to recycle are not in vain? What will you do to stop this practice of exporting our waste overseas? And we'll start with Michelle Paquette, if I'm not mistaken.
Can I go last on this one? Is that okay?
Sure, I don't see why not.
I don't mind going first. I had that prepared for my outro. So one thing that's very important for me, and it's increasing the responsibility of manufacturers. So we're recycling. However, whatever we put in that blue bin is not being recycled. And when it's being probably recycled, it's being shipped overseas. Those are jobs that we can bring here, and we need to take responsibility for the waste that we have locally. So bringing that responsibility back means that the manufacturer is responsible for the full life cycle of the product. And that's a key element for managing waste.
I think what we'll do is we'll move down to Paul Durst on the other side and move back along here and then with Michelle.
I think the solution lies in education and awareness. Let's try to eliminate from the producer like us. Let's not have to recycle all the things that we're recycling now. Let's not get the the plastics and so on. It takes time. It's like in the 70s when there was all kinds of litter on beside the 401 highway. Some fines for littering and a great awareness from people that pollution and throwing your garbage out is bad. It's changed. You drive along there now and it's very clean. So it's about education, awareness, and then I think letting people know that we're stewards of our own land. You know, we're the stewards. It's within us. If people become CEOs of corporations, people become leaders. It's in the mindset of us. Let's just take care of our land and our environment. Let's let people do that. We have a voice, and the PPC will give people a voice. So if you have the solutions and innovation, we'll go with that.
Thank you. We'll hear from Manaforte. I won't pretend that I know exactly what our policies are about not reducing, but taking care of those plastics that are sent overseas. I do remember, though, when we found out that the Harper government had sent a container in the Philippines and it had sat there, that it was a huge problem. And the government took the responsibility of taking it back and starting to taking care of that garbage. So I know that we have a lot of work to do, and I would be interested in knowing what would be the best policies or even the best actions to change the current activities that exist in Canada to make it better. The other thing I will take time to share is that by banning single-use plastics by 2021, we will have to find that solution in not only the future plastics that might come around, but we need to make sure that we dispose of the current plastics that are in our oceans, rivers, and parks. Merci.
Now hear from Stephanie.
So yeah, I think the one thing that we can do that will help with that is to ban single-use plastic and make the person who sells the plastic responsible for the lifespan of that plastic. And we also need to work with our communities with a better recycling strategy. Right now, like Oriana said, the plastic is not getting recycled properly, and so we're not doing it right. We need better strategies. We also need to work towards a waste reduction strategy, and that's for me.
And finally, we'll hear from Michelle.
So our position is that we can't trust large corporations to reduce their use of plastics because their bottom line is profit. So if for them making more money is by still using plastic, they're not going to change anything. So it's under democratic control and public ownership that we can actually make that possible.
Thank you. One of the roles of a federal government in a federal system is leadership. How do you envision the federal government being a leader in environment to the rest of Canadians? What should that leadership look like? So we'll start with Paul Durst.
Again, leadership is about being transparent, or good leadership is about being transparent. As good leaders of the federal government, we need to be setting the example for others. So yes, initiatives within the federal government, initiatives that involve that innovation, that involve that freedom to think through a problem and come up with those good solutions is where ultimately we will find where we can find, or we can be a good example for others. So it starts with us. I mean, it starts with the leaders, it starts with the politicians. We can advocate. We can advocate, we can help make aware, we can educate. This is forefront. The environment is so critical for us, for our families, for future generations, that we need to take it seriously. And this needs to be part of what we do. It's just how we conduct ourselves. We do things like we make sure that the lights are off at night. We make sure that we're using the most fuel efficient way to get our civil servants at whatever level to wherever they need to be.
Manaforte?
One of the first things we did when we went in government is we decided to put a price on pollution. That's leadership. A lot of people are still trying to understand what does that mean when you put price on pollution. We need everyone, businesses, people, Canadians, to understand that pollution can't be free anymore. And by putting a price on pollution, that is called leadership. Also, I believe that setting a target for net zero emissions by 2050 is a good target. But it's between now and 2050 that the action has to be done. And I believe that we have a lot of work to do. And many of our proposals are in this document that I have called the platform. But we have a lot of work to do, and we have to work with the provinces, with the municipalities, with Canadian and businesses to together have that leadership of fighting against climate change and environment. I was at the walk, and I saw the youth talking to us. Now we need to take action.
Thank you. 7 minutes here.
When I was young, my mom always told me, if you don't practice what you preach, you lose a lot of credibility. And so when a government declares an environmental crisis and then buys a pipeline the next day, you don't practice leadership. We're going to be leaders in the climate change by changing our government fleet by 2025. We want to lead by example. We want to retrofit federal buildings right away, and we want to be transparent in this fight against the climate change. Thank you.
Leadership is recognizing that our oil emits 70% more CO2 per barrel. We are not doing any good to whoever we're selling this to, and not any good to humanity as well. Leadership is recognizing that the government must provide alternatives. We are not currently providing alternatives. Leadership is also recognizing that we will not find a solution unless we work together. And that's what we want to do as the Green Party, work with everyone to find the right solution locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Paquette.
First of all, thank you, Stephanie, for pointing out this contradiction. For us, good leadership means no more pipelines. For us, good leadership means no more fracking and no more tar sands. It's clear we need to end fossil fuel energy extraction right now, and we need to move towards renewable energy sources and put them under democratic and public control. We also need, again, to cut military spending by 75%. We need to end war, and we need to end climate change.
Thank you.
So if no one's opposed, I'd actually like to start this question with Stephanie Mercier, which I think you'll understand why when I pose the question, but happy to do it however you prefer. So this question is, issues like the environment are important to the youth. I believe the NDP is proposing to lower the voting age to 16. Why this age, and why don't any of the other parties, and do any of the other parties have opinions about this? So,
yeah, my answer is going to be very brief. If you're old enough to have a job and you're old enough to pay taxes, then you should be old enough to have a say in the future policies of this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll move down to Ariana Gavirano.
I agree with what Stephanie just said, but the age is not the issue right now. It's the participation, and we're not giving people hope or even wanting to be engaged. People don't want to be engaged right now. So I think we need to rethink the whole democratic process and actually have a conversation on how we want this to work. Do we still want government that govern with partisanship, or do we want a multi-partisan government? How do we want the voting process to go? I think it goes way beyond what we're talking about right now, which is the age of voting. But I totally agree. If you're old enough to pay taxes, you should be old enough to give your voice officially.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Michelle Paquette.
So I agree, we agree with both of our colleagues here. The youth students are revolutionary and they deserve the right to vote at 16. And we also believe in electoral reform.
Thank you. Alders.
Yeah, I do agree that the youth are very intelligent these days, and they are getting smarter and smarter all the time. And I've got a couple of them at home, a few of them. They do have a say, and we do need to listen to their voices, definitely. I think the idea of having an age at one time was, that sense of independence, that ability when they can break free from home a little bit and have their own ideas as opposed to those of their parents, etc., and they're considered adults. But yes, they are very mature for their age, and I think that they should have more responsibility, and we should take into consideration more so their voices, because they have good things to say. They have a different perspective, and they are very, very smart.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question, because I, in the past 2 years, had the Youth Council for Ottawa-Vanier, and we did have that conversation. And the youth around the table had said, we need to start looking at that question of lowering the age to 16. So I am for having that conversation and even proposing to go forward with this. The other thing is that in the Liberal Party, just so you know, during my nomination, the rules had changed. The youth of 14 and more could vote for their Liberal candidate. And I found that it was very interesting to see how many of the youth participated during that nomination. Now, I understand that's a party, but it's a good platform to have that conversation and to see how the youth are participating today and how we have to engage them in citizen conversation, and also have the responsibility of sharing with us and putting pressure on us on what should be our future. So I appreciate this conversation, and we should continue.
Admitting that we live on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory and various lands across this country, what is the key role that you foresee for Indigenous peoples? And we'll start with Oriana Gabriano. Yes. Admitting that we live on unceded and unsurrendered lands, what is the key role that you foresee for Indigenous peoples?
Okay. First of all, it is important, and I think it's something that we need to recognize right now. It's a reconciliation process. It's not a negotiation process. And what the federal government right now is doing is a negotiation. We've been hurting those populations so many times that right now it's not about when they're telling you that they don't want a pipeline, they don't want a pipeline because they know it will affect their lives. So we need to listen and not continuing and perpetuating the harm that we've been doing. So I want to repeat that again so that my counterpart can hear it. It's not a negotiation, it's a reconciliation. Thank you.
Communists believe in the right to self-determination and sovereignty for all nations. We need to recognize and implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, including their right to veto. This means, again, guaranteeing Indigenous rights to full, free, prior, and informed consent over all development, including resource extractions and pipelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Durst.
Well, one thing, I think it's awful that we had to wait for the UN to tell us to take care of our people in this country. And I think one thing we need to do is have greater respect for all of our First Nations. I was talking to somebody from the Assembly of First Nations, and they told me that in Ontario, actually 87% live outside of the reserves and in urban areas, and a lot of them here in Ottawa-Vanier. So they're other citizens that we treat the same as everybody else. And we need to give them that respect. And if you look at our platform, you'll see the PPC has some other things where they want to give that respect back to our Aboriginal peoples in this land.
Mona Fortier.
Again, in 1 minute, it's very hard to share all of the information that I want to share with you on the continuing path of reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples. And we have a strong mandate to pursue and work with the Indigenous people to undergo the journey of reconciliation, and it doesn't transcend only one government. We have to put more in working together, and we need to continue to move forward to a place where Indigenous peoples in Canada are in control of their own destiny, making their own decisions about their future. And I will really gladly have a conversation with you on this, on how we can make it better, because we have a lot of work to do still. And just in Ottawa-Vanier, I've had the privilege of working closely with the Inuit community and also the Algonquin community through either the Wabano Center or the different centers supporting Indigenous. And we are working together locally to see how we can better advance in this path to reconciliation.
Thank you. I've been to Nunavut the whole summer, this past summer actually, and you know what I've seen? The way we treat Indigenous communities is shameful in Canada. It makes me ashamed to be Canadian. We need, it's important to keep reconciliation and Indigenous rights at the heart of every decision we take, but it's especially important to listen to Indigenous climate crisis, because they have been taking care of our land for longer than any of us. And so we're committed to a true nation-to-nation relationship, reconciliation, recognition of Indigenous rights, and equal funding. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do 2 more questions before coming to closing remarks. So for this question, we're going to bring things back to a more local issue. You've all talked a little bit about public transit, but how do you plan to deal with urban sprawl in Ottawa, which promotes people spending more time in cars to commute and stretches the resources of public transit thin? We'll start with Misha Beckett.
So for today, all I can say is that we want to halt urban sprawl in and out of Ottawa.
There we go. So we'll have Paul Durst.
I understand all the reasons why we want to control urban sprawl, but I think again here we need to, from a federal perspective, and that's what we are candidates for federal government, we need to respect jurisdictions and allow the municipalities and provinces to do their work.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, pour moi and for me, it's really important that we continue on the path that we've been working on with municipalities and the province, investing in active transportation and also the LRT. We have to continue on that phase. It's so important that transit is coordinated for the whole region, and that includes the Gatineau region. With the National Capital Commission, the cities of Ottawa and Gatineau, we need to work with the master plan that will be decided in the next year to make sure that we have a regional strategy to advance with the transit system and make people move better. So that's one thing. We also need to transfer from gas to electric transit, such as school buses and just buses in general in the city. So we really need to continue to put that, and also chargeable, the healthy zero emission vehicles to be available in our communities.
Merci beaucoup. Stéphanie Massieu.
Yeah, so I think active transportation is very important. I also think electrified transit is another big point. We want to do it by 2030. I think one of the easiest ways is to work with municipalities to make public transit free for everyone. That way we encourage people to take the transit. And then I think that's one of the best solutions. So thank you.
Thank you. And I
So the solution have been mentioned, and I'm just going to talk about why it's a no-brainer for me, why we shouldn't continue to expand. First of all, because we haven't managed to decentralize all the services. So within our city, services are very centralized, whether it's health services or other social services. This means that when you're not able to do that, you shouldn't expand, because right now you're not serving properly the people you have in that space that you have right now. And that's on a social side. But on the environmental side, it's more longer commutes. So when you're traveling, it's longer commutes. It's again creating pollutions. When you're delivering things, everything that we will do will take more time and will use more energy to be done. Basically, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. One last question from the audience, very Ottawa specific. Gatineau Park is not protected by legislation. What steps would you take to assure that this status is changed to one of protection? So we will start with Paul Durst.
That's a very good question, and I don't have a very good answer for that one. I think that we need to preserve our natural areas. Everybody can see the Gatineau Hills from Ottawa. It's a beautiful area. Bikers love it. Nature lovers love to walk the trails. Whatever we can do to advocate, from my perspective, to preserve what we have there and protect it from any kind of development going on around there, something taking away from its beauty and its history, we need to look at that, and we certainly would.
Thank you. Wonderful, Steve.
You closed it, right?
I'm saving power.
Oh, nice. Good call. One habit at a time. I really wish I had Will Amos with me right now, the candidate for Pontiac. Has he been really a leader and an advocate for Gatineau Park during the last 4 years? And protecting Gatineau Park needs to continue to be done for sure. I'm not sure how to legislate it, but I'm sure that there has been many studies through the NCC and a lot of consultations done through the National Capital Commission to see how we can continue to protect Gatineau Park. So that is something that I would be open in working with not only my colleagues, but also looking at what needs to be done to protect Gatineau Park. Merci.
Thank you. Stephanie, merci.
So I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not sure exactly on our platform what we have for the Gatineau Park. I do know we have a national park strategy that we want to implement, but the thing is, we need to advocate for national parks, because have you been to the Gatineau Park? It's amazing. Just going for a walk clears your head. And so areas like that are important, and we need to preserve them, and we want to preserve them. So again, this is something we need to do, and the NDP is very, very committed to preserving areas that are green. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add that it's not only for environmental purposes, because it's also a tourist attraction, and it's a sustainable way for economic, how would I say that? Development. Thank you.
So I'm going to end on a really surprising note and say that for once communists agree here with the rest of the...
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that we're all in agreement. Whenever I try to advertise Ottawa to people that are not from Ottawa, the green spaces are the #1 seller for me. Being able to, well, live close to the downtown core, but have access to these spaces within 5 minutes is the best anyone can hope for. And so I'm really glad to hear that from all of our candidates.
Yeah, thank you to all of our candidates for your answers to the questions, and thank you for the audience for bringing forward such great questions tonight. Once again, thank you everyone for coming. So we'll just close off with all of the candidates' closing statements, and we'll do those in the same order as we did our opening statements, which means we'll start off with Mona Fortier of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. First, I want to thank my fellow candidates and the organizers and also the MCs of the evening for a great conversation. And I said it in my introduction, and I'll say it again. I stand by our government's track record on fighting climate change. No other government has done more in 4 years for the environment. We have taken concrete steps to protect the environment by putting a price on pollution, launching the process to ban single-use plastics, and making historic investments in public transit. Our plan to protect the environment and grow the economy is working. We've also been investing in families and seniors and making life more affordable for everyone. We've done a lot, but we know we need to do a lot more. We've made local investments too, from a green heating system for government buildings to working with the City of Ottawa and the NCC to improve multi-use pathways and wastewater treatment. We've also provided funds to the University of Ottawa for their new Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics complex, which has replaced an old efficient building and was built to the highest environmental standards. Protecting the planet starts with each and every one of us. We all have to change our habits in our homes, in our work environments, in our cities, provinces, and countries. We all have a role to play. One of my small contributions, which I'm fairly proud of, is that I drive an electric car. Our ambition plan is working, but we know there is much to do. Young people around the world have taken to the streets recently and told us to step up. We need to follow their examples, set out to work towards our net zero emissions future. On October 21, you have a choice between a party that doesn't believe in climate change and one that does.
Of the Liberal Party.
Thank you.
And we'll now move on to. That's not true. You also have a choice. We are the NDP.
Thank you.
There's the Communists. So just making that clear. There's not just two choices.
Move on to Paul Durst of the People's Party of Canada.
So thank you for this opportunity to talk tonight. Thank my fellow candidates as well for being here so that we can have this discussion. The People's Party of Canada platform, all its policies are based on 4 values. That's individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. And they look through, even in the environmental policy, through the lens of those values. And in this country, we've been blessed with natural resources, including fossil fuels. Let's not forget that is a great asset to this country. It's not a detriment. The PPC is not convinced that climate change is a crisis, but as outlined in our platform, of course, we support a clean and healthy environment for Canadians. Even if you disagree with me tonight on anything that I may have said, I think it is good that we can have an open and very tolerant discussion about a very important subject, and that being the environment. So let's keep on the discussion. That's what we want to do, because I think by discussing, we find the right solutions for Canadians that will benefit them all in the long run, not just short term, but long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul Durst of the People's Party of Canada. Next, we'll hear from Oriana Gaburano of the Green Party.
So I'm going to do my closing statement in French because I believe that I'm only going to be repeating myself. Donc, bonjour pour les francophones et les francophiles. Merci d'être ici. Je veux vous dire pourquoi je suis ici aujourd'hui. Je suis ici aujourd'hui parce que je suis fatiguée de voir qu'il y a des choses qui ne sont pas faites, de voir qu'on a des solutions qui sont là, qui sont présentes, disponibles pour nous, et de voir que les gens qui nous sont là pour nous représenter ne font pas ces choix-là pour nous. De voir aussi qu'on parle à nos représentants et qu'ils ne nous écoutent pas. Je pense aujourd'hui que je suis le visage qui représente le mieux Ottawa-Vanier, et je pense qu'il faut commencer à regarder à comment mettre en place des solutions qui répondent aux besoins de toute la communauté. On a une communauté diversifiée et il faut le comprendre. Encore une fois, vous pouvez regarder dans la salle aujourd'hui. Vous êtes les privilégiés. Vous êtes ici parce que vous avez ce privilège. Il faut donc repenser à comment on traite notre communauté pour que tout le monde soit au même niveau et dans la capacité de se sortir d'une situation désastreuse, tous ensemble. Justement, on va vers une situation désastreuse avec le climat et il faut comprendre que c'est tous ensemble qu'on va y arriver. Donc, les plus marginalisés, eux aussi, il faut leur donner cette option, cette opportunité de pouvoir voir cette crise et de pouvoir évoluer avec nous. Donc, je vous remercie beaucoup d'être ici aujourd'hui, mais s'il vous plaît, rappelez-vous qu'il y a des gens qui ne peuvent pas être ici aujourd'hui parce qu'ils cherchent leur repas de demain. Merci.
Merci au Parti vert du Canada pour notre entente de Stéphanie Mercier.
Thank you again for joining us here today. This was a great discussion. Un gros merci aux candidats d'avoir mis leur nom d'avant. C'est tellement quelque chose de courageux de faire ces jours-ci. Puis c'est tellement un beau cadeau de vivre dans une démocratie tellement robuste. This is not a partisan issue. There are lives at stake. Our planet is at stake, and we have no option but to boldly act against climate change. The transition to a green economy may not be easy, but I'm in my late 20s, and for my entire lifetime, there's nothing that was substantially done to do anything to adequately prepare ourselves for what is happening. So I'm asking you this, after decades of the same representation here in Ottawa-Vanier, who are the Liberals really working for? They have not lived up to their promises. They haven't worked for you. They've given millions away to oil subsidies, and they've been working around the clock for the biggest companies and their lobbyists. I'm in this for you. The NDP has a plan that is going to help Canadians make the choices that will help tackle climate change. You'll wake up and turn on your lights powered by renewable energy that has been built and maintained by skilled workers. And then you'll make breakfast from locally sourced foods, providing a livelihood for our farmers. You'll go to school or to work and on free, environmentally friendly transit or in your low emission vehicle, plugging it in when you get there. You know, you'll arrive home after a long day to an energy efficient house heated by renewable energies, and you'll have some more good food with your families and a good night's sleep. You know, I think Canada really wants to do something to fight climate change, but they just haven't gotten a government that's given them the help to do it. I mean, isn't that what the government is there to do, to enable people and businesses to do the right things? Life in carbon neutral future doesn't have to be harder for working people. We just have to act as a government right now. A greener future is possible if we have the courage to act now. And so by voting for me, I can promise you.
Thank you.
That I'm in this for you, I'm in this for our planet, and I'm in this for our future. Thank you, merci, miigwech.
And finally, we'll hear from Michelle Paquette of the Communist Party of Canada.
Because I didn't get a chance to present myself, I'm a proud library worker, feminist art historian, committed youth organizer, and a fourth-generation francophone from the Ottawa-Vanier working class. I joined the Communist Party of Canada because I believe that we cannot hope for a peaceful future and a healthy planet in our current profit-driven system. If capitalism and wars of aggression are the root cause of the climate crisis, socialism is the solution. A successful struggle to implement these previous policies requires building a powerful coalition of people's movements, including environmentalists, trade unions, indigenous peoples, and all those who defend the interests of people in the environment. Such a people's coalition could lead the fight for decarbonization and many other reforms, with the potential to form the basis for a broader political challenge against the domination of big business and pro-corporate political parties. By winning a majority in Parliament, a people's coalition could open the door to fundamental changes, including economic and social reforms to shift from private ownership of wealth and resources towards a socialist society based on democratic public ownership and working class political power. This is the way to tackle the climate crisis and to win a world of peace, freedom, and social justice. Merci.
Thank you. To close off, I'd like to thank everyone who made it out tonight. I know that there are many things that you could be doing on your Thursday night. And I want to start by highlighting that across the world, there was young people who were marching to bring a voice to climate change and the environment and the steps that we need to do to change that. But today in this room, and not to profile anyone, there is a small minority that composes the young people in this room. So for the older people in this room, I want to thank you for making this issue a priority for you, despite it not being the most catastrophic thing in your lifetime. It shows a great amount of empathy, and it genuinely shows how this is an issue that is on everyone's mind. I'd also just like to bring two things into the conversation. The first one pertaining to evidence for democracy, which is the importance of evidence in government, which we touched on through multiple questions during this debate. As someone who comes from the background of science, I cannot stress enough how, as a young person and as a scientist, I believe that it's important that government listens to science. And I was so glad to see that spirit emanating throughout this debate. Lastly, I want to discuss how important it is that we cannot have a conversation about the environment without a conversation with Indigenous peoples. It's important that they are not only partners, but the core of the conversation that we are having, because again, the most marginalized communities are the ones that are most affected by this issue. Finally, we need to talk about international collaboration. There's a lot that we can do at home, but we also need to hold international partners responsible for their impact on climate change. We cannot just ship off our issues elsewhere and have it dealt by someone else. We need to be collaborative partners on this problem. So I hope that despite the lack of conversation around international issues, that it is still on everyone's mind when we're walking away from this room. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Kayla. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so as we close this off, the first thing I'd like to remind everyone is, for those of you especially who didn't have your questions answered tonight, you can go contribute to the beautiful tree that you see on the side of the room here. The candidates will be looking at everything posted there, so make sure your voices are heard. And as we close everything off, I just want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. I would like to thank all of the organizers of the event tonight. This was such a great initiative. Yeah. I'd like to thank the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Ottawa for hosting this event. And I would really like to thank all of our candidates for coming out here for this wonderful discussion. And for participating on such important talks. So once again, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.